Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. On the webinar today, we have Byte Software Services' very own Dan Cranbrink. He's our SAM Business Development Manager. He's going to be introducing the webinar for us before handing over to Mark Lillywhite, who is the pre-sales consultant at Snow Software. Just before handing over, I'm just going to run through some very quick housekeeping with you. During the webinar, you will be muted, but there is a questions box on the right-hand side of the screen. So if you do have any questions that you want to ask at any time, please just submit them via the questions box. And we'll have a Q&A at the end of the webinar, and we'll read these questions out. The webinar recording will be made available to you probably in the next day or so, so I'll send that out directly to you. And at the end of the webinar, there will be a sort of feedback critique form that will just pop up at the end, just take you 1 or 2 minutes to fill out. Really do appreciate your feedback. So if you could just take the time to fill that out, we would really appreciate that. I'm just going to hand you over to Dan, who's going to kick off the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Cassie. Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce today's webinar. I hope you're going to get some value from it. But really, just to set the scene first up, Byte are our platinum partner of Snow Software, who we have on the call today. We've had a strategic partnership with them since 2007. And as many of you know, as I look through the attendee list, it underpins the vast majority of our SAM managed services to our customers. Last week, we were extremely honoured to accept 3 of their annual awards. We received Partner of the Year, Service Partner of the Year, and indeed New Business Partner of the Year. And I think just that really underpins and shows the value which both our organisations take from that partnership. And for us, it specifically allows us to add a huge amount of value to our customers and help them managing their software assets and their software usage much more effectively. For us, the world of SAM is changing, and cloud, specifically SaaS, is providing numerous challenges to many of our customers. And it's clear that not always those challenges are visible or indeed apparent today. And specifically, we're going to be looking with Mark around how SaaS or how Snow can help you manage and gain visibility of SaaS-based applications. Just before I hand over to Mark, it's probably worth noting that those of you who are indeed existing Snow customers and utilize that platform, the vast majority of you will have the license entitlement to use anything that you see today. So if it is of interest and you want to start getting the visibility which Mark's going to go through, please do reach out to your Bytes account team or indeed my services team, who will help advise you on how to get that functionality switched on. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Mark to take you through the remainder of the webinar. Mark, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Dan and Amy. So the title of this webinar is How to Gain Visibility of SaaS and IaaS Usage. And really, the presentation comes in 3 main forms, or 3 stages, shall I say. First is just to kind of set the scene a little bit about SaaS and what we think of it, and the sort of things that we're seeing in the industry and how Snow kind of addresses a little bit of that. The second bit is some top tips around SaaS applications and how SAM teams are evolving to perhaps start to take care of SaaS as well. And then the third one is the third section is some stuff that's, let's just say, best practice, particularly around Office 365, but SaaS applications in general, where I think a good SAM team or a managed service, that the Bytes provide that sits on top of a SAM team, can really add some value to an organization. So if I just jump in, so I work at Snow Software. I've been in pre-sales for many years. Working at Snow for 3 years, I literally talk to hundreds of Snow customers and prospects every year. And SaaS has gone from being a little thing that people are kind of interested in. I think Office 365 really exploded this idea of SaaS subscription applications, and of course, when IaaS, you've got your Amazon and your Azure, the 2 most popular. We see a bit of Google Compute as well, and then there are other vendors, right, that are starting to spring up as well, like SkyTab, for example. But SaaS is just a big part of any SAM team, or it should be. And the reason I love SaaS is because, and I'll go into this, it's prime time for saving money. Most people get into SaaS applications and they will overspend. So without sort of stealing my own slides from later on, let's go into a little bit of a definition, and then we can sort of talk a little bit about that side of things, and then go into what Snow does. So Gartner defines software as a service as software that's accessed and managed remotely. Now, we always think of it as web, but of course it can be, remotely RDP onto something. The key thing, though, is that it's nearly always on a pay-for-use basis of some kind. So some kind of subscription model, some kind of pay-per-use metric. So rather than the traditional perpetual whereby licenses with maintenance agreements that then renew every year, every 3 years, subscription is kind of a 3-year subscription, 5-year subscription. I hear a lot, even 1-year subscription, and it comes in different flavors. So quite often we'll see 1-year commits where you can flex up and down after a year. So Office 365 is a bit like that, but also there are things like Snow, for example, you can buy on a 3-year subscription commit, and some software, let's say AirWatch, for example, you can literally flex it up and down on a month-by-month basis. So the idea is that you pay as you use rather than you buy it in one big lump and then sweat it for as long as you can. SaaS is obviously growing hugely. This is some IHS market statistics, and we can see there that the green bar is the SaaS growth, the dark blue bar is the infrastructure as a service growth. In fact, I was talking to our own IT director, Alistair Pooley, and in his previous company, he went from 0% IaaS to 80% IaaS in the space of a 2-year period. And we see a lot of that everywhere, and we at Snow are doing it ourselves, right? So if we move on, why do people choose SaaS? What's the great thing about SaaS-based applications as opposed to, typically sweating perpetual licenses? And the answer is very simple, right? It's quick, it's easy, it's cheap. And as the old adage goes, pick any two, right? So quick, you can turn on and adopt SaaS applications literally in seconds. If you want to roll out Snow and get it working for you, we can turn on a tenant, Bytes and ourselves can get a tenant turned around and turned on within 20 minutes. We can have agents rolled out or data rolling in within a few hours. And that's a massive change in the industry and across all SaaS applications typically. It's easy. And what we specifically mean by that is it's easy to scale. So if you want to go from 5 users who are trialing to 50 users to 500 users, typically any SaaS application is pretty geared up for that. And it's also things like the upgrades. So because the upgrades are central, remember the old mainframe days where you had centralized compute? These days, SaaS applications are centralized, and the upgrades are taken care of for you typically. If you look at Snow, for example, the centralized updates, the upgrades to the agents, etc., all centralized, all managed, all automatic. So a lot of the sort of upgrade woes go away. And then cheap. So this is the one where we all have a laugh, because apparently SaaS applications are cheap because operational costs are lower, and of course you don't have to maintain the SaaS application, so therefore you don't have to spend money on an expensive IT team maintaining things. The flip side of that, though, is people always overpay with SaaS applications, because once you get into subscriptions, it's very hard to get out of them. There's a reason that Amazon Prime days, which is today I think, are doing 99p for Prime Music for 4 months, and then they'll kick it up into a different cost bracket. And the idea is get you into subscription. In fact, I bought a HP printer yesterday, which has this quick ink thing, £2 a month, easy peasy. But suddenly I'm paying permanently £2 a month. Now, £50 a year for ink, I'm thinking I'll probably spend that anyway, but everything's going subscription. And if we look at a typical SAM team, we all work in a SAM team, right? And we think of ourselves as the guardians of the galaxy, right? We are the people who are protecting the organization from crazy amounts of weird spend or, rolling things out in the wrong places. We're protecting our company and protecting the users as well. And so our natural inclination is to kind of build little paths for our users to take. And this is a real picture from our higher campus. But the idea is that if users want to go down a 365, but they don't want to have this and that, or they want to have this particular application, us as the SAM team will negotiate, we'll figure out the best agreements, we'll advise procurement on the best way to buy, and we'll build little paths for every application, for every group of users, and kind of we build up this matrix that we see here. But there's a problem, and that is that users like to take their own paths, particularly if they have the ability to do so. And so this is a place where I used to play golf, and you can see here that people don't want to walk up that path that was provided and back down the other path to tee off. They walk up these little steps, which have obviously been made over hundreds and hundreds of people, thousands probably, because that's an easier path. And so users will make their own paths. And this one summarizes it really nicely for me. Somebody's built this beautiful little roundabout and planted it. People just walk straight through the middle because it's easier. And again, this one here, you can actually see the two paths there. And this particular user, he's like, no, I'm going to take the shortcut. I'm going to take the easiest route in order to get to where I need to be. And SaaS gives users the ability to take their own paths. That's really the message here. typically we think of the people who are these users who make their own piles as the IT geeks, right? The people who are sort of deeply embedded developers, people who are really quite nerdy. But the reality, more and more, is it's ordinary people like Lee Martin, one of our product managers, like David Foxon, one of our customers, like me and myself, right? I have SaaS applications, I use things like MailChimp. And, you know, this guy who's our CEO, Axel, he's probably the worst of them all, right? Because he's got the authority to do what he likes and now has the ability to. So SaaS is everywhere, SaaS is easy to adopt, and people are getting into it in a way that they never have before. But Snow's been getting fit, Snow's been working out. We've been doing a lot of work in the background to enable SaaS discovery without having to do anything from the agent or the customer side. So, you know, we've been working out, and what we've now got the ability to do via the standard Snow agents from 5.3 onwards is the ability to detect well over 1,000 SaaS applications, more every day, right? We have the SRS team working on building more SaaS definitions. And in order to do that, you literally just roll the agent out and off you go. So we can start to build up a picture very quickly of which SaaS applications are being used in our user base. And so you'll see weird and wonderful things. Some of this stuff you'll understand, like Altacian is Confluence, that's something we use internally. Datadog is, I think it's something to do with marketing. But you know, when I see things like CakeHR, you know, or I've done a lot of live work with this stuff, and we're seeing all sorts of other people's service desks and weird and wonderful applications that you never knew existed that are in use in the organization. And so that visibility is just part and parcel of the Snow agent now. But the point being, you now know who's accessing SaaS applications, how often, how long, and we can start to build a picture of what's going on and therefore where that spend might be going. But, you know, it's not just Snow Inventory that's been working out. What we've also done is we've beefed up Snow License Manager and Snow Integration Manager in order to get a lot more information about very specific SaaS applications. And so what we can do now is build up the traditional picture of a SaaS app like WebEx, for example. You know, we've got 27 live users, but what we can also do is do compliance against it. But more importantly, we can connect to the SaaS subscription portal for that vendor or those vendors to pull back who's got a subscription and whether they've used it. So we've got 9 out of the box at the moment, Office 365, the ones you see here and a couple more. And the idea is that if only 76% of our box accounts are being used, well, that means 24% of those subscriptions are being paid for, but we're not doing anything. And most subscriptions can be cancelled, can be modified, can be reissued to somebody else. Depends on the agreement, but there's always ways to save money with subscription software. And so that allows you to look at the overview of those subscriptions. But in this particular case, and I picked WebEx here, you can go into the detail of every user and when they last used their subscription. And in the case of Office 365, which I'll come on to later, we can go into a lot more detail on that as well. But, you know, we at Snow use WebEx quite extensively, and the amount of WebEx accounts that lie dormant but are getting paid for, it's staggering, and it's easy money to save. You know, it's the sort of thing that as a good SAM person, you can just, in your monthly report, you can say, and subscription savings this month were, and put a nice, decent sum against it to justify, you know, the whole SAM program and what SAM's all about. So subscriptions married up with usage, married up with discovery is really in the product today and easy to switch on and get working. But if we move to the second part of the presentation, who's really paying the bill, right? Because at the end of the day, a lot of this SaaS spend is not coming out of central IT. So, you know, the slide that I use here is from Tesco Club Card. So Dunnhumby invented the Tesco Club Card, or worked with Tesco to do the Club Card, and were eventually bought out by them. And the quote there is, data is the new oil, right? The more somebody understands about your buying patterns, your usage patterns, the better they are able to either market to you, or worse still, sell your data to somebody else who's then going to use it for whatever they want to. And so the scary sort of scenario is who's paying for that SaaS application that's in use in, I don't know, the IT department. The scariest version is no one's paying for it because they've ticked the free version. And when you tick the free version of any SaaS application, quite often there'll be a whole load of things that SaaS application is allowed to access and do that then monetizes it somewhere else for that particular SaaS vendor. So the no one option is the scariest option, because they're ticking EULAs and signing up on credit cards, and IT know nothing about it, legal know nothing about it, data is leaving the organization, and you know what, the users are getting their job done, so they're happy, but they're not taking the care about what might be affecting the rest of the organization, right up until there's a breach of some kind, and then of course all hell breaks loose. But what we also see is we see the business unit pays. And what I mean by that is I need to use, I don't know, let's say Dropbox, and I need the corporate version because I need to share it with, you know, more than 5 people or something. Well, my manager can quite easily say, Mark, just get a subscription and do it. And then I'll sign it on my credit card, expenses paid off, and we're all good here, right? Except central IT know nothing about that. That's just a business unit spend, and we see a lot of that. The problem with business unit spend is, again, the same thing. They're not taking care of the EULA, they're not taking care of the implications to the organization. They're simply getting the job done quick. And of course, they've probably signed up to the least effective subscription compared to a centrally negotiated one. We quite often see a scenario where projects pay for SaaS applications. So let's imagine you need some, I don't know, project management software for a short period of time. You can sign up for that out of the project, and then year 2 and 3, you can let IT pay for it. SaaS vendors are getting very clever at the moment, because what they can do is they can backload a 3-year contract. So they'll get a 3-year commit out of a customer, but what they'll do is they'll put 10% in year 1, because that's what the project pays for, and then the 90% comes out of year 2 and 3. The scary thing being that now IT gets saddled in year 2 with a big cost for something that might not even be being used, but has been committed to up front. So project spend is one that we see really quite a lot, where projects buy it but don't use it for that long. And then finally, you know, the holy grail, I guess, not always, but certainly the best way is if a central IT, a SAM function, can pay for SaaS subscriptions, because then it can be carefully and correctly negotiated, discounts can be obtained, break clauses can be obtained, all the stuff that needs to happen to make it proper software and not a quick one-off spend. And if we look at some EULAs, and I've picked Salesforce, but check any EULA, you'll always find things like this. The first thing you see in this EULA is, even if I'm on a free trial, the same EULA governs all of the services. Everything that we're doing is governed as if it's a paid for subscription, right? And then what you see here is payment obligations are not cancelable, and fees paid are non-refundable. So if you overpay, if you rock into another year's subscription and didn't mean to, tough. You've paid, it's gone. Purchased quantities cannot be decreased during the relevant subscription term. Well, how long is the subscription term? You know, is that yearly? Is that 5-yearly? So again, there's questions here that a good SAM team would ask, and that an average user wouldn't give 2 hoots about. And then you can see here, if you provide credit card information to us, any renewal subscription terms can basically come off that credit card. And so, you know, that's really quite scary, because most users, and I see this all the time personally as well as professionally, most users don't think about the subscription until bang, it's gone out their account, and they're like, whoa, hold on a minute, how did I end up paying again? Oh, well, it's year 1, it's year 2. I mean, Google Drive is a good one for that. You know, every year 50 quid goes out. I think, oh, I must cancel that, but I never do. And then finally, in this particular EULA, you can see here, when you leave the agreement, there's a 30-day period where your data will be provided back to you, okay? It doesn't say what format it will be provided back to you, but it will be provided back to you if you request it. After 30 days, it's gone. They have no obligation to supply it to you. So again, if the subscription term ends, you don't pay, and nobody asks for the data, 30 days later, everything you put in Salesforce is toast. And that's the sort of thing that you need to think about with SaaS subscriptions, as opposed to just the cost. So, you know, the next 2 slides are literally that. So what do we typically think of? Who has access? What's the uptime? Where's the data stored? What country usually gets asked? What are the kind of subscription costs and terms? But what we should be asking is a little deeper, right? So things like, who owns the data, right? How is the data segregated and protected? You know, what protocols, what do they do to make sure that they're not hackable? Nobody ever asks those questions, but it's the sort of thing that, you know, if they're adhering to certain standards, or if they're adhering to certain policies, have they got pen testers? All these sorts of questions are the things that should be gone into before an agreement is signed. Who has access to the data apart from yourselves? So obviously every SaaS application has a back-end, let's say, repository of some kind, and there's a team that settle that repository. Well, who has access to that, and what processes do they have in place to make sure that that access is correct, and that it's scrutinized, and that it's audited, and that it's checked on? How is identity verified? I was talking to Dan about this earlier. You know, at the end of the day, if you want to log on to the Snow console, it needs to be generated by Bytes, but who requests that, and how do we know that the requester is genuine? And how do we know that the user being requested is genuine? It'd be quite easy for a lot of SaaS applications to request a logon for a user that maybe doesn't exist, or maybe is in AD, because I can create that too, right? And then I leave the organization, I still have access, right? So that's a good question. The one that I come across a lot is backup and restore processes. Most SaaS vendors will have some kind of backup and restore, and a few of them, maybe a lot of them, they never test it. And I used to sell backup software in my past. If you don't test your backup, you have no real guarantee that you're in any way, any good shape to be able to move forward. So a good question to ask is, what's your process, and when did you last do a full disaster recovery test? It's something that it's incredibly important, because most times if the SaaS vendor has an event and loses your data, they have no liability against you. That's all your problem, not their problem. So again, checking this level of stuff is always a good idea to get into. What happens when the contract finishes? We sort of alluded to that with the Salesforce EULA. How do you get your data back? What format does it come in? You know, you might get a massive CSV file that's unusable by anybody when you finish your contract. And a really good question to ask is, what happens when there's a data breach? Now, a lot of organizations will try and keep that very, very quiet, because the headlines are what people don't want. However, there should be a duty to inform you, and your security team should be able to then say, okay, based on this breach, what do we want to do? And again, it's a good question to ask up front. So the idea is that the average SAM team, particularly when it comes to SaaS, is going to stop being maybe the guys that, or the team that says, no, don't do it like this, you need to do it this way, building the paths all the time. It needs to become a little bit more like this, right? Which is encouraging and protecting the users from themselves, but providing easy ways for them to get hold of those SaaS applications. So a couple of examples of how you can use Snow to really help you to not so much police, but ask the right questions at the right time, is something like SaaS Azure console usage, right? So Azure console is exactly the same as any other SaaS application. And what that means is that it can be detected by Snow. Now, if the user who's logging on to Azure is a well-known user and they have the application rights, which is something you can set in Snow, happy days, no problem whatsoever. But if it's somebody we don't know, the first thing to do is to contact that user. Why? Because you want to make sure that they're getting their Azure or Amazon Web Services, for that matter, infrastructure on the correct plan. You know, you've got different plans, you've got different subscription terms, you've got different ways to do things with Azure, and the average developer is probably going to blast in there and get whatever they need right now. They're not going to think about the cost implication, because if they've got the log on and the central IT or somebody else is paying the bill, happy days, right? I just need to get my technical stuff sorted. But there might be a really big cost difference between what they would order and what they should order. So by knowing they're using the Azure console and being able to contact them, you as a SAM team can now add a real chunk of value to the organization and to that developer, right? You say, I'll just order this one because Bob's already built that one. You know, you can start to really get into that. Again, you can add the application rights, which is a Snow feature that just marks that user as someone we know about who's allowed to use XYZ application. Because all applications, SaaS or on-prem or installed, they're treated the same way within Snow. So any functionality for an installed application is also available for a SaaS application. And then finally, oh, I'm going backwards there. If we look at something like requesting instances of Azure or Amazon Web Services or Google Compute, Snow has Automation Platform. Now, Automation Platform is a request and automation tool. So it's kind of two tools in one, if you like. So even if your request is somewhere else, the automation piece can be handled by Snow quite effectively. the thing to ask, and we do this in our own training department here at Snow, is when you request an Azure or Amazon instance, you need to ask the user, is this a permanent instance or is this a temporary test instance, for example? Because if it's not permanent, i.e. it's not infrastructure for the next 3 years, well, then you can ask them for how long they would like it to make sure that when you deploy it and give the email to the log on to the user, you've got the ability to take it away again later. And, we see it all the time where people, it's a bit like in, grumpy dads in their house, turn the lights off when you leave the room. It's kind of turn the SaaS off, turn your infrastructure off when you stop using it. And of course, people don't necessarily do that. And I think everybody's guilty of it. Even internally at Snow, we see the odd Azure instance that hasn't been requested through this process, and it's run for far too long and costs far too much money. So visibility is one thing, and we have that in Snow, but this request process allows you to really dig into how long do you want it for? We'll turn it off for you automatically. We'll ask you first before we turn it off. And the users can have their request completed in 20 seconds. But now we have the power to turn it off later, which if they just went in the console and did it themselves, they'd have to remember to do that. Remember, Azure and Amazon, they get paid by how long that stuff's up. So there's no incentive for them to shut it down automatically for you. If you're ordering and building permanent cloud infrastructure, you have Microsoft use rights that you can leverage. So hybrid use rights exist for Windows Server and now for Windows SQL as well. And so if you're a university, for example, you can reduce the cost of an Azure instance by 80% if you use hybrid use rights to cover the cost of the OS and the SQL and just rent the infrastructure effectively. So again, if you user goes through a request process, you can ask that question, and then the SAM team can add a ton of value by going, well, hold on a minute, let's order the infrastructure and then we'll use hybrid use rights rather than order the full shebang and pay 5 times the cost, right? So either way, asking questions and involving the SAM team at this level using automation platform adds real benefit. If there's no hybrid use right and it's permanent infrastructure, then that really needs approval because you're committing up front to multiple years of spend. If it's the time's up on a temporary one, Snow can just email the user and remove that instance. So you're really controlling the spend in a way that just isn't happening at the moment. I mean, I was talking to a customer literally maybe a month ago, and they use Google Compute, right? So if you have the Google Compute token, I think it is, or something like this, or the code, any user who has that can spin up Google Compute engines. The problem is, central IT get landed with a bill, they have no idea who's spun anything up. And Google themselves won't give the usernames to central IT because of GDPR. So you can really get in a pickle if let's say, people have unfettered access to infrastructure type projects. And again, you don't want to block them. You don't want to build the paths for them. You just want to make it easy, but with that little bit of control at the back. So if we just switch on to E3 for a second, and then that kind of summarizes on a couple of top tips that we've got around E3. So Snow's got the ability to plug into the Office 365 portal to bring back usage information and plan information. So what that means is, and Mark Potts is a colleague of mine who sits next to me, is in Snow, you can see the user view, and now you've got this subscription plans tab, and we'll put in the subscription plans that user has as pulled from the portal. So straight away, you know what usage that user is creating, if you like, and you can see what subscriptions they have. So you can see, Power BI's free, but we can also see Mark hasn't used it. So at some point, I'm sure he will, but if it's free, we don't really care. But for the paid for stuff, that's really something that we can leverage in order to save some money later on if they've not been using it. If we look at Office 365 in general, it's really, really important to understand that you have a lot of options with 365, and that the typical sales tactic of just sign up for E3 is really not that healthy, because you will overpay. Okay, so this is an example from David Foxton, who now works at Johnson Matthey, and this is literally what he was doing with Snow, and with obviously a bit of 365, not even knowledge, just understanding how it's used. So he was able to go from one blanket agreement to having different profiles for different users. So you can see here, you've got E1 for certain types of user, and the pound signs represents the cost. If you look at E3, that's obviously your full suite with Office, and You've even got E5 for certain users. We at Snow have 5 users on E5, it turns out. And then you've got 2016 Pro Plus, which you can trade that in if you want to. But what he's done is kept a load of them because there's certain users for whom that is absolutely adequate. And the on-prem installation-based license works really well for certain categories of user. Again, they've got certain types of user who only ever look at email, but they have to have legal hold. So again, Exchange Online Plan 2, nice, cheap little SKU that gives them exactly what they need and nothing more. And then they've got a load of warehouse workers where, again, they need online apps because sometimes they open an Excel spreadsheet. Once in a while, they'll open an Excel spreadsheet. And so, you know, they can't just give them Exchange Online. They have to give them a little bit more. But again, it's cheap and it's specific for those users. And we would recommend that Snow will give you the vast majority of the data to be able to make these decisions. But only somebody like Bytes can then look at that data, unless you're an expert in your own right, of course, in order to say, right, let's profile this, let's then do the costing, let's work out the best way for you to go into your annual true-up or your new 365 agreement. So Snow data and a little bit of knowledge can save, literally, as David said, you know, several £1 million. And I was flabbergasted. I mean, just by profiling and doing this, you can save a chunk of money. The other thing that we were talking about was this idea of subscriptions. So, you know, sometimes you'll get to a point where a vendor will want you to move to a subscription model. And why do they want you to do that? Because basically the vendor sales guy gets paid for new business if you move from on-prem to subscription. There are also other benefits, but that's what the vendor salesperson has as their motive. So you've got option 1 here, which is full subscription, hosted by the vendor, trading all your old licenses, right? So you're now on a subscription forever. However, that's not the only option. It's the only option that will be presented to you. Option 2 might be you can do the hosting, and that means you have to add in the licenses for the hosting, so SQL and Windows, for example, but you can get a much cheaper subscription cost from the vendor. So again, that's a hybrid model, and that might work quite well from a cost perspective, depending on what you're going to do with that application over time. And then option 3 is the one that, you know, most vendors will hate, and that's the idea of, you know, just sweating your perpetual licenses, paying the maintenance, and trying to keep it going as is, with the maintenance, with the upgrade costs at your own expense, if you like. Now, option 3 is, you know, if you're depreciating that particular application down and you're going to get rid of it, that would be the right way to do it, probably. Option 2 is probably the cheapest way, but with a bit more work for yourselves. And option 1 is the easy way. The sales guy gets paid, you know, commission on the new sale, but it's also the most expensive way, I can guarantee you that. So again, this is just a generic example, but these are the sorts of things you can think about when big events come up with big vendors that you're dealing with at the moment, or applications that are really quite important to the organization. So one of the things that we recommend is most SAM teams are not experts in every vendor. However, if you identify the critical applications that are in use in the organization, quite often you'll have SAM champions. And that'll be somebody who is not in the SAM team, but who understands that particular application, how it's used, what people want from it, and kind of becomes the presenter, the owner of that application. So that's an important role to identify as building a SAM team, is these sub-members of the team, if you like, who can just own one product or one type of product and give advice back to the SAM team about how it's being used and where to go next and that sort of thing. Again, this is something that Bytes offer as a managed service, and they're really, really good at identifying exactly that sort of stuff. So it might be that you're quite good at Office or Microsoft, but you know, all that Adobe stuff or all that Autodesk stuff is a complete mystery. And again, this is where Bytes are really good at supplementing a SAM team. The key to it all is how to best utilize the software. And if it's, you know, going from on-prem to SaaS, happy days, you know, you need to think about that quite carefully, as we just pointed out. But also you've got this idea that sometimes SaaS isn't the best way, but sometimes it is. So just having knowledgeable people that you can leverage is always a good idea. And, you know, assist with internal usage reviews and compliance reviews. Events come up all the time with different vendors and different applications. And so you just need someone in the room who understands that application in detail as to whether it's well used and whether you're getting the best cost out of it. And you don't do it for everything, but all of the, you know, as soon as you've got Snow, you know which are your big hitters, which are your big applications that people are using a lot, and you can focus on those to start with. You've also got the idea of producing reports in order to do either cross-charging or visibility, particularly if budgets aren't centralized. We deal with a lot of companies where the budgets are held by different opcos, and so you end up in a situation where you've got to generate some reports for those people. Snow's very good at that, but again, it just needs a little bit of expertise, whether it's in the existing SAM team or a little bit of leveraged expertise out of the Bytes team. And again, any new solutions that are being proposed, it's so important that the SAM team has representation there. Because, as we said before with the project licenses, people will buy something on a project and then they'll just chuck it over the fence when the project's finished, the initiation project or the implementation project's finished. So if that's well represented by SAM early on, I can absolutely guarantee there'll be howlers avoided at the very least. So, tips for SaaS optimization: use Snow to understand what your users are doing and what applications are in play so that you can then get ahead of the curve. These review audits are really, really useful because that's the point in time, sort of, let's look at this one now. Regular service review meetings with your tier 1 vendors, that's an obvious one, but it needs doing and you need to prepare for it. And educating the users that if they want SaaS applications, please, please, please come back to IT and, at least let us look at the EULAs and the agreements that you're signing up to in order to make sure that there's not some problem that's being created that people just don't think about. And just 2 slides to finish. So we've all heard an acronym CIO. Now, does it stand for career is over, which is the old joke, or is it Chief Innovation Officer, which is the one that we see quite often? And that's kind of the phrase, right? Is, it used to be Chief Information Officer, but these days Chief Innovation Officer is probably more appropriate. And then just to finish with SAM, software asset management, obviously we all know that. Stop all mavericks. It's kind of the old school way of thinking of SAM. Stop annoying me is genuine. If you have children under the age of 20, just send Sam in a text or in a WhatsApp to them, and they'll know exactly what you mean. But of course, maybe it's the SaaS advisory manager. So it's this idea of advising and helping, and because SaaS is so oversubscribed, you can definitely save money with it. So that's me handing back to Amy and Dan.
Thanks, Mark. We're just going to go to a very quick Q&A. We've got a fair few number of questions, so if we don't have time to go through them all today, we'll probably just answer a couple. We'll come back to you directly with the answers. So I'll just read a couple out. Do you have any savings reports for people making full use of the Snow tools, for example, automation, compared to using the Azure data alone via the Azure portal? Mark?
So Azure for us is at an early stage, and what I mean by that is we have the capability to connect to the Azure portal and pull in information about what assets are kind of in there, if you like, which ones are turned on, which ones are turned off, and obviously we use the Snow agent then on those particular Azure instances to work out what software's on there. So at the moment we're treating Azure very much as a request portal, a provisioning portal. And then the idea that, AP automation platform has the ability to report on the number of times something was executed, so you can attach costs to that. What we're not doing at the moment is sort of analyzing the true cost of the Azure instance itself. So if you run up a 4 processor or 4 core 16 gig of RAM Azure instance, that costs X per month or per day. What's the cost of that? That we're not into that costing level at the moment. But there is certainly work ongoing internally to develop something around that. And I know Bytes have an offering in exactly that space that kind of supplements this at the moment. So at the moment, automation platform does have costing and can tell you how often something was executed, and you can attach costs to that. But if we're talking about deep and proper Azure costing information, the Bytes offering can do that, and Snow's sort of developing something in the background, which will probably come out, probably not this year now. That's certainly my understanding at the moment.
Okay, great. So another question. We have Snow License Manager and automation hooks up to this too. How does this work if you use Snow License Manager via a service provider as a managed service? And is automation something that is managed on-prem, or can this also be part of a managed service?
Okay, so today, automation platform has to be on-prem. And it can be on a virtual server. The system requirements say physical, but it doesn't need to be a physical server at all. So it has to be on-prem. The Snow License Manager is obviously hosted by Bytes. Actually, the way that automation platform talks to Snow License Manager is through the API. So as long as the API user is created in the SPE platform for that particular tenant, automation platform and Snow, that tenant will talk to each other and do everything that we need. But automation platform has to be on-prem at the moment. I mean, I guess you could host AP as long as you had the AD and the connectivity between the sort of the live estate, if you like, and wherever AP was going to sit. But certainly best practice at the moment is to have AP on-premise in a virtual machine of some kind and use the API calls with the tenanted SLM.
Perfect, thank you. And just another quick one. When is Snow for SaaS available?
It's available right now. So the SaaS, so basically SaaS discovery is part of the agents, and we develop further and further SaaS discovery pattern matching, if you like, every day. So there's more and more coming. It's just automatically fed down and trickled into the agents so they can look for those patterns. SaaS subscription is also available today. So we have the 9 that we've released, so Office 365, Salesforce, Box, Dropbox Web, and a few others, WebEx. And again, we're developing, a few every month, every quarter. And so there'll be more by the end of the year. That's all part of the SIM. And the SIM is included in an SPE platform. Or if you're on premise and you pay for the SIM, then obviously as we roll out other ones, they come in there. That may change next year, but certainly at the moment that's the way it works. And it's all released software, so you can use it today.
Perfect, thank you, Mark. If we go back to, we'll answer all the other questions directly, and we'll wrap things up now. If you do have any questions at a later time, speak to your Bytes account manager, or you can email tellmemore@bytes.co.uk. The webinar recording will be sent out to you in the next day or so keep a lookout for that, and you can rewatch that or share that with your colleagues. But for now, that's all from us. Thank you for joining.
Thanks, Dan, and goodbye.